go ahead and get started. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. This is Shakiria from the South Florida Community Development Coalition. So I want to welcome all of the participants on today's webinar. This is our Tools You Can Use webinar, focusing on Opportunity 360. And once again, welcome. Just some housekeeping before we get started. Just want to be sure that everyone on the call is aware of just how things will work today. So any questions that you have, you can enter into the chat box on the right-hand side. We're going to reserve all questions and comments and answer those at the end of the webinar presentation today. You also have included a handout of the Opportunity 360. It's an overview in PDF format. This webinar is being recorded, so you also have access to this information even after the webinar is concluded. So for those of you that are not familiar with the coalition, once again, this is Shakiria on the line, and we're basically here as a nonprofit membership organization based in Miami, focused on expanding affordable housing and economic opportunity. And so we accomplished this through three main primary areas, and that is doing capacity building for nonprofits as well as the community development sector, working in the areas of policy research and advocacy, and working to create partnerships. So it's very important for us to ensure that the sector has access to information. So you will be seeing us do more webinars such as this regarding tools that we believe that the community development sector can use. So today's webinar, and I will introduce Dr. Tiffany Manuel, who will actually do the demo in a few, is really focused on opportunity mapping and primarily Opportunity 360, which is a new platform created by Enterprise. So at SFCDC, we obviously believe in a comprehensive approach to community development, meaning that in order to improve neighborhoods and the quality of life, we must understand the various aspects of a neighborhood. That includes its residents, the housing, access to employment, business, education, health services, transit, parks, and more. So understanding the interconnectedness of these areas is the first step to improving access to opportunity. The second step is being able to use this information to engage in cross-sector solutions and make strategic and equitable investments. Obviously, we also believe that with that equitable investment, we can create opportunity right where people are, not that people have to actually necessarily move to go find that opportunity. So as I stated before, the purpose of the webinar is really to provide a demonstration of Opportunity 360, a recently released online platform that has been developed by Enterprise Community Partners, which happens to be one of our national partners and a member of SFCDC. The tool was designed and is intended to help communities understand and address community challenges by identifying pathways to greater opportunities using cross-sector data, community engagement, and measurement tools. The goal of the tool is to help communities make smarter investments and create collaborative solutions. The tools and resources in Opportunity 360 is also intended to facilitate strategic asset building approach to community development. Before I go ahead and introduce Dr. Tiffany Manuel, do want to get a better understanding of who's actually in the room. And so with that, and we're going to do a quick poll just to see who is on the line. And if you could just take a couple seconds just to answer so we know exactly kind of who's on the call, because this tool can be used by various individuals. Okay, we're going to get ready to close the poll soon. Okay. All right, and so, okay, so we have a mix. So we have some local government planners, we've got community development professionals, and community-based organizations, nonprofit developers represented on this call. And as I indicated, this will be recorded, and so it will be available for additional individuals to watch the presentation as well. And so with that, no further ado, I am going to turn over this particular demonstration to Dr. Tiffany Manuel, who is the Vice President of Knowledge, Impact, and Strategy for Enterprise Community Partners. Tiffany drives the collection and dissemination of data and information from within enterprise and across the affordable housing industry. Comes to us with over 17 years experience in working with this field and a wealth of knowledge as it relates to making strategic investments in affordable housing and community development. And so with no further ado, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Manuel. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. First of all, let me just say thank you for the invitation to join you. I know that there's such fantastic work happening in Florida, across the entire state, South Florida especially, but around this issue of affordable housing. There are a few states, I think, where this issue of affordable housing and community development is so critical that that the fact that you all are on a call in the middle of the day, this close to the holiday, says that you value that work tremendously and want to see it reflected most powerfully in your work. So what I was going to do is to do this in kind of two stages. The first stage, I was really going to sort of take you through a bit of a PowerPoint that would help you to see a little bit about why we developed Opportunity 360, kind of what is that, what are the resources that are available in that, and then talk a little bit about some of the kind of challenges of trying to expand opportunity for people in the communities where we live. And then I was going to do, as we talked about before, the kind of live demo. So let me try. Let's just see. I'm going to move my screen around. All right. And I'm assuming that you're seeing a PowerPoint. Is that correct?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, good. All right. Can you still see that now?
Yes, we're good. We can still see it.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure. Sometimes I have this, so for those of you on the phone, I have a split screen, one of these great technology things where you got split screens and all this stuff going on. And sometimes the technology works very well in your favor, and some days it just does not. So
right.
I wanted to make sure that you could see that.
Well, we're actually seeing both your current slide and your next slide and your notes. So I don't know if you want to expand it.
Great.
Yes.
Something like that.
So that might be the split screen.
Oh. You seeing all my notes? Let's see. All right. Give me 1 second. I'm going to try to give us 1 second here, guys.
Sure.
All right. Okay, how's that? Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay, great. So now we can actually start. So thanks for hanging in there through that. I'll try to make it worth your while since you all hung through the initial technology issues. So let me just start by saying that opportunity is what we're after, and it's a challenge in this country. For those of you who are working hard and have been in this field for a long time, you know that the outcomes for low and moderate income families in this country have been steadily worsening. You know that it's really tough to make ends meet. You know that there are a whole lot of folks out that are homeless. I think the latest count came out just a couple of weeks ago, like 2 weeks ago. So we're starting to see a lot of news articles across the country about homelessness and how that is changing, but essentially there are about 600,000 folks across the country at any given time who are homeless, and South Florida is certainly no stranger to that phenomenon. I think we're also seeing those two middle bars there where people are paying a lot for where they live, whether they're renters. About 10 million folks are paying 50% or more of their incomes for rent, and then another 9 million are paying 50% or more for their mortgages. So even for those folks who own their own homes, it's really tough because they're paying so much that there's just not a lot left over. What we also understand is challenging in terms of opportunity is not just having a home or how much you pay for that home, but where it is located is also very important too. And we know that even once you kind of take out the first three buckets, there's still, even in addition to those folks, another about 24 million people across the country, low-income families across the country, who are, if they're not already paying a lot for where they live in places where there's not a whole lot of stuff around. There's not a lot of transit or a really good schools for their kids, or not great access to health care. So when you put those things together, it says a lot about the challenges that people are experiencing with respect to being able to have a decent quality of life, to be able to have a life for their children that makes sense for them. For those of you who know me, you know that there are two parts of this that I always talk about. One part of this is really about how we build the capacity within our organizations to fight for greater opportunity for low and moderate income families. That's huge. How do we build the capacity of our organizations to do this work well? And I think there are two components for me that are really most important. One of, actually probably three, two of which I'm going to talk about today. One is just our kind of advocacy and our strategy work. What's the strategy that we bring to it that makes sense of the political environment in which we find ourselves, which is a very challenging situation at this moment. But the other two are really data and evidence. What's the evidence and data that we have that demonstrates why our work is so critical, and it helps us other folks to understand the impact of what we do so that they value it in a way that makes sense. And then the other piece of that is messaging. How do we get that out in messages that actually make sense so that we can get folks excited about what we're trying to do and why it matters to them, to help them see a stake in our success. So a part of our reason for developing Opportunity 360 was we were watching a lot of things happening both external to enterprise in terms of how opportunity was being defined and measured, but also just internally, the need and desire to measure it differently. So like most organizations, we could measure a lot of things at enterprise in terms of our success. We could say we were, putting capital in communities, and we were creating and preserving a number of units, and we could talk about the number of square feet, of affordable housing we were putting together, or commercial square feet, or all those kinds of metrics. But what we could not tell you are the issues about what was happening to the communities in which we were working. Were people healthier? Were their kids doing better in school? Did they have better access to transit? Did they have a better shot at getting a job because they had affordable housing, or because of something we had done or helped to do or partner with somebody in that community to do? And so a part of the vision for Opportunity was, one, can we provide some of that greater clarity, context, and data for folks? Second, I think, and where I'm actually going to start today is, can we actually think about redefining what it means to be a community of opportunity? So I'm actually going to start there and sort of back into the data conversations. I think, when we look across the field right now in terms of communities of opportunity, the way in which that has been defined, unfortunately, in the short term has been when people think about opportunity or a community of opportunity, they think about places that have great schools, that have great transit, they have all the whole basket of things that they think you need to have a great community. There's nothing wrong with that, except for the fact that from our vantage point, every community should be a community of opportunity. In other words, we should not only be investing in places that already have those kinds of attributes, but there should also be investments in communities that have a variety of other kinds of amenities that we don't even capture because we don't understand or acknowledge those or measure those thoughtfully. So a part of our vision is to sort of set a frame that says all of these communities in which we work are communities of opportunity, where the pathways for anybody who lives in that community should be open and accessible. They should have a decent quality of life in terms of housing stability, decent access to jobs and transit, decent access to other kinds of economic and social mobility, all the things that we would assess but every community starts out as that definition. So from our vantage point, it was really about how do we redefine the conversation so we're not just talking about outputs, but we're talking specifically about what's happening to kids like this in communities. Do they have a decent shot at success in their lives? And from our vantage point, the ability to measure that, are folks, in places where they have access to the pathways that they need is really important. So I would say one of the reasons why we often struggle, right, not just on the measurement front, but struggle to advance our work in communities is a part of the messaging that has been difficult. When we go out and we talk to our communities about we're working on affordable housing, or there's a nearby site where we're about to build affordable housing, or even sometimes we're going to put a new homeless shelter, or we're going to provide services for homeless vets, or services for single moms, or whatever it is, right, the populations that we're concerned with, we often get a lot of backfire in terms of, or I would say pushback, from folks who are sympathetic, sometimes empathetic about what those issues are, but they push back around a number of different things. So as part of Opportunity 360, one of the things you'll find on our website, which I'm going to share in just a couple minutes, is a variety of resources to help you build the capacity to overcome some of those issues. And so last fall we put out a first of several reports that we're about to put out around messaging and what it means to be trying to advance opportunity, especially around this issue of housing and communities. What often happens is when you say we're about to build an affordable housing unit or complex in a particular place, what happens is it's kind of pushback. Sometimes it happens because people push back, and at the top of that you can see they say, buy the house you can afford or move. If you can't afford South Florida, that's not a problem. Then move to South Carolina. They got better, cheaper houses there, or Kansas, or Alaska, right? And so we get that kind of backfire, or some of the other backfires. Some of it happens because the way we're talking about these issues in crisis, there's a crisis happening in terms of housing affordability, and people push back and they say, so wait, I got to solve all that? There are 50,000 people in South Florida or Miami-Dade or Broward or wherever who are housing insecure, and you want us to solve that? And so it feels so big that it gets difficult to talk about. So the reason I want to bring that up is because even as we think about our data, it's not just on the one hand having data. It's what we're trying to do is provide a broader range of resources that can actually help you build your capacity to make the case for the work that you're trying to do, to have the ability to be able to measure that, to have the ability to partner with folks in your community who are thinking about some of those issues, and then finally to be able to evaluate that effectively. So I guess what I would say about this as an introduction is, as you're thinking about Opportunity 360, it really is a platform that has a lot of data resources in it, but is really about how we can help build the capacity of what you're trying to do in individual places across the country. And I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to download the report. It's on Enterprise's website, on the Opportunity 360 website, and you can see some more of this. What are the kind of backfire issues? And most of all, I would say, what are the kinds of things that help you get up and over those things? So when people say to you, listen, it's expensive in South Florida, we get it, and so move someplace else. What is your reaction? What are the things that you can say that help you to get people up and over some of that backfire? So in that report, there are 10, I would say, recommendations specifically that we make for how to get people up and over that stuff, because it is really important. And so from my vantage point, as I think about this notion of building our capacity to address some of these issues, it is how do we take those three things I said at the very beginning, the sort of strategy that we have around advocating for what we need in doing our work, the data that we have access to, getting the best and brightest data that we have, and then putting that in messages that won't backfire, but that actually engage and excite people about the work that we're doing, which actually is fantastic. And so I'll give you an example just about the place where this sort of data conversation and this framing conversation about the things that you can begin to do to overcome that outcome actually really intersect. So here's what's in the frame. Here's something that we often say in our industry. In our frame, we often say things like, there are 11 million renter households that are severely cost burdened, 50%, that are people that are paying 50% or more of their incomes for housing. So some of those early stats that we gave. There's nothing wrong with that statistic. In fact, it's true to form. The problem is if you walk that data out in that way, right, framed in that way, it's going to backfire, and it is a trap. And when I say that, we know from a lot of good sort of empirical research on this from all across the country that that backfires. And the reason that that data point backfires is because of this narrative around mobility and personal responsibility. So what people will say to you is, yeah, that's right. These people are paying too much for their housing because poor people make poor decisions. That's exactly right. These people should not be paying so much for their housing. They're buying more house or more space than they can afford, or they're buying or renting an apartment or buying a home in a community that they cannot afford. So Miami may not be the place to buy a home, right? If you cannot afford Miami, maybe the place for you is in another community, maybe South Carolina, maybe Kansas, or maybe just a different part of Florida, but it's not where you live. But what folks will say is what you shouldn't do is buy a home that you can't afford or rent an apartment that you can't afford and then ask me as a taxpayer to subsidize it. And so that's the kind of backfire that we often get when we walk that kind of data out in that particular way. And so there are a lot of redirections that we make in that report, but here's a redirection. You can say that, our paychecks are not getting bigger, but the rents are, and it's pushing many of our neighbors out of our community. Many of neighbors who are leaving have been longtime residents of this community who watched their children grow up here, who've gone to church here, who played with their children in our parks, and now after making those contributions, they're being edged out. We can do better. And for a lot of reasons, that works better. One, because it redirects attention from an individual person making an individual decision. People are not taking their paychecks and buying something that they can't afford. And it redefines that problem as structural. It's not about Sally or Sue or John who are making a decision that is not the best decision, a bad decision or poor choice in the way the public might sometimes think about it. But it's that they are in a larger structural issue where, you're caught in the middle of rising rents, that don't match your wages. Those are issues that are not solved at an individual level, right? Johnny is not in a position to make the rent prices go down and not in a position of raising wages, so Johnny is not responsible for that. It really is a broader public concern that requires our attention. And I would say that if you wanted to use that data point, there are ways to do that, and here's how I would say you do it. And one of the recommendations in the report, we talk a lot about being able to talk about the story of us. So instead of talking about the story of individual folks who are being displaced, talk larger about how we as a community need to rally around this issue. For example, in our city, we are a can-do city, or South Florida, we are a can-do region. We are building a new reality for our people, a new future for our children, a new model of healthy communities, and providing a great place for all who live here. And that starts with providing quality homes and thriving communities, no matter what the size of your wallet. We all deserve a shot at success. And the reason why that works is because it taps into this value of American pragmatism. We can do it. We can do it. It gives the kind of that hopeful value frame around it. But it also focuses on collective agency. We all can do this. It's not the individual responsibility of Johnny or Sue or Matt or whoever the folks are. It's a collective responsibility, and we have agency in how that gets done. It's also future in orientation. So together we can create a future together that is optimistic, and people like that. And it also talks about a universal benefit. So it's not just that we're providing a house for Johnny or Matt or Sue or Terry, whoever they are, right? It's that we are providing that resource, but the benefit actually comes back to everybody. We all benefit because of those decisions. And then when you want to build in the data part of that, the way to do that is not to focus just solely on the folks who are at the very lowest levels of, so the $0 to $13,000 a year, which would be, ELI families or, It's to show the entire spectrum. So you can show that across the country, and this is probably for South Florida too, no matter how much money you make, whether you're middle class or upper middle, whatever that is, that all of us are actually paying more for our homes as a percentage of our incomes, and it is becoming a problem for all of us. And so again, that collective agency, we need to do something about this issue that we are all facing. And that kind of inviting people into the challenge and the solutions is a part of what helps people to understand and wrap their arms around why it is important that they link arms with you. So from that vantage point, again, Opportunity 360 is about, from our vantage point, helping our community partners across the country. Many of you already worked with Enterprise before, to get that level of data, but also to help you understand how to use it, whether that is in strategic decision making and community planning. In fact, we're doing a lot of work around some of the HUD kind of regional plans for the assessment of fair housing, but also to do needs assessment of that kind of work, the data that provides, data around cross-sector collaboration. So I always say, if you look at a particular community, and I'm sure in this audience you all understand this, it's that people usually don't have a housing problem, right? There are a whole lot of issues going on. It's transit, it's education, it is like all the things that I think Shakiria talked about at the very top of this call. We understand the comprehensiveness of the things that we need to provide, and you need data that comes packaged in that way. The same thing around community engagement, resource, and impact assessment. All of that is the data that we have had in our sector hasn't really been flexible, nimble enough, thoughtful enough in its packaging to be able to help us with these various things. And so, what Enterprise is really trying to do at the top of this is really to provide a resource that can begin to help folks in our field have the data that we need, and then to think thoughtfully about how you take that data and weave it back into your messaging and weave it back into your strategic advocacy work that you're doing on the ground there. So let's talk more specifically about what's in the platform and get down to the nitty-gritty. So when we think about kind of what we're measuring, there are lots of things. I hope that you all will be very excited about the data tools and the opportunity to measure opportunity differently. There are lots of things that are happening in communities. Certainly, we track at least 5 kind of categories of metrics: housing stability, education, health and well-being, economic security, and then mobility, which we talk about as kind of transportation kinds of issues. And I think we recognize that there's a lot happening in communities even beyond these 5 things. But from our vantage point, these are the 5 priority issues. If these are not working well for folks, for low and moderate income families, if you don't have a place to lay your head at night, which is housing stability, if you don't have a way for your kids to get educated, to take on decent jobs, or to get a college education, it's tough, not only for you, but for the future of your children. If you don't have access to the resources that help you maintain your health and to maintain overall well-being and functioning, it is tough. If you don't have economic security, a decent job, or at least income that can support you, or if you don't have a way to get around to jobs, to the grocery store, to the laundromat, to the other things, you do not have a shot at success. And so while we could measure any number of thousands of things around the data aspect, our notion was we want to be able to provide data at the community level for every neighborhood in the country that measures at a level of granularity what is happening in terms of those 5 areas, not because they're the only ones that matter, but because those are the core areas, especially for low and moderate income families. So you will see us really looking at what are the outcomes for people who live in communities across the country arranged around those 5 sort of buckets of categories of metrics. You'll also see that we have a lot of attention to the pathways. So I just talked about the outcomes. Now I'm going to talk about pathways. So you all know, right, the outcomes for people are about, do you have a job? Do you have are you renting a place or owning a home that is within your budget? Do your kids have access, are they getting a decent quality of education, or are they graduating from high school or graduating from college? Those are metrics that are outcomes. But what we often don't measure very well, right, in our space are the pathways, right? How do people get there, right? So these are things like do you have a decent transit system? So it's not your responsibility to figure out to create the transit system, right? But without a transit system, it's really hard for you to be able to say you can have a decent job and get back and forth, right? So all the things that matter in terms of pathways, the educational system, the transit system, the workforce development system, how are those functioning and working? The housing delivery system in your community, what does that look like? Who's like? So all of those kinds of things matter, and our attempt is to think about those pathways in terms of 4 different areas. People matter. You as an individual have a lot to do with whether you have real opportunity in life or not. We know that. But we also know that the home that you live in and the building that you live in matters. If you're in a house, for example, that has a lot of lead or that has asbestos or other kinds of issues, you don't have a shot at success because you're sick, right? The that what those things do in terms of your health and well-being, they limit your access, right, to be able to live a decent quality of life. And so that is an opportunity pathway, right, for you in that community. Do I have access to a home or buildings in this community or where I'm living that actually promote my health or promote my well-being and those kinds of issues? The same thing is true of neighborhoods and networks. What's in my neighborhood? Do I have access to cleaners or healthy foods or banks that will help me with a small business loan if I have a great idea, or just ATMs to be able to get money when I need it? Do I have access to a decent transit, or is my neighborhood walkable? Can I get out and walk? Is it safe? All those kinds of things actually matter, and we need to be able to measure that at a community level. And then finally, the sort of policies and systems. You may be doing great in your own community, but if, and I won't get political here, but just hypothetically speaking, if they shut down the ACA, the healthcare law, and you find yourself in the unfortunate situation of being one of the folks who had a pre-existing condition and is now no longer covered for whatever reason because they have changed the law, then your access to opportunity then gets diminished because of the policies and systems that may be changing that have nothing to do with you. So from our vantage point, while we want to look at those opportunity outcomes, what's happening to individual people, it's also important for us to be looking at these pathways to opportunity, which is really how you get those better outcomes. Okay, so I'm going to say here that we have, from a data perspective, there are 4 major data, I would say, platforms or data tools on the platform. There are actually a lot more, but these are the 4 categories. There's a measure tool that allows you put an address in, and it can, it will provide an assessment for any neighborhood in that particular community. 30-page report gets spit out in about 7 seconds on what opportunity looks like in that particular community. There are listening tools which allow us to hear what's happening in the community, so in terms from the community perspective. There are partner tools. How do you find partners? Like if you're in housing, but you need to find health partners, or you're in the health space and you want to find partners who are working on food insecurity. How do you find those partners? We have a tool that helps you to do that, and then a lot of resources that help you to evaluate your success. So I thought what I would do is just quickly kind of show screenshots of those, and then just get right into the tool and take you through a few of them. So actually, I think I'm going to go right to the tool. Let's see. And Shakira, you tell me if you're not seeing the tool, if I need to make some adjustments.
So far, we're there. Can still see you.
Great. All right. So Opportunity360, if you go to enterprisecommunity.org, Opportunity360, you will find a free of charge kind of tool on our site. Everything you see here is free of charge. From our vantage point, it's important. It's our kind of mission as part of an organization to build the capacity of the field in a variety of different ways. So all of the tools that you see here are free to use and share freely with any folks in your community who want the kind of resources that we're providing. And I want to make that clear because it is very expensive to put kind of a lot of these tools together. But from Enterprise's vantage point, we just feel like it's such an important thing that our field be staffed with the kind of data and technology that helps us to do our work. So on the platform itself, there are a whole lot of resources, and you can certainly go through, but I want to just focus on just a couple of the data tools. So if you go here, there's a measure tool. If you just click on that measure icon, it takes you to a separate page where you'll see, as I just showed you, the kind of wheel of outcomes. And it also will take you to, I'm actually going to make this a little bigger. It will also take you to a series of tools. I'm going to just go through the first one, where you can actually put in any address in the country. And in fact, I pulled one earlier. Let's see. What's the address I used for this one? I can't remember the address I used. Hold on one second. I have one too. I'm going to say, I want to pull up an address that you all might recognize as one there. Let's see. So if you put in, so I will just say that if you put in any address in the country, you will get a 30-page report on opportunity in that place. But I'm going to Florida. All right. Let's hope I put that in right. There you go. So what comes up initially is it'll give you the location of where that location is that I just put in. And if you just click on See Enterprise Report for the tract, you click on that, and as I said before, in about 7 seconds, it literally pulls together this 30-page report that gives you two things. It gives you a detailed assessment of what opportunity looks like in that neighborhood, the neighborhood that's surrounding that address that you just gave it. But it also gives you contextual information. So how does opportunity look like that neighborhood compared to every other neighborhood in the country, compared to every other neighborhood in the state of Florida, and then to every other neighborhood in the region. So if I just go down, first of all, it gives me this orientation. All this information is pulled at the census tract. So it gives me an orientation of the data. Where am I actually pulling that data for? And you can see there are several neighborhoods that are in that census tract for which this is pulling information. So it gives you that kind of orientation so you know where you are with respect to that. And as you go down, one of the first things you'll see in the measurement report is an index of sorts, so a kind of a summary. And these metrics are really important. What this is, it gives you that contextual information that I was talking about. The legend up here gives you a way to read what you're seeing at the bottom. So in housing stability, what that dark bar says is if you were to line up every single neighborhood across the entire country, that 28 is telling you that that particular address is better than about 28% of the neighborhoods across the country, but worse than, right, the other, 70 or so, about 70% of neighborhoods across the country. That middle bar is the regional percentile. So if you were to line up every neighborhood in the region, right, around that particular address, what you would find is that neighborhood would be better than about, on housing stability, would be better than about 55% of the neighborhoods in the region, but worse than about the other 45%. And the same thing at the top of that is true, the light bar, the state percentage. So if you lined up every neighborhood across the state, 0 to 100, that neighborhood would be better than about 37% and worse than, right, the other percent. So if you look at this, what it does is give you, and each one of those categories have about 5 or 7, I would say, metrics in them that are really high priority metrics that capture that particular realm. So if I were looking at this, I would say we're doing okay in terms of housing stability, especially as it relates to the region, the overall region of South Florida. But still, not great in terms of how we compare to the rest of the country. And I say there's what we call hover over text. So if you get confused about what this is as you're downloading your report for your neighborhood, if you just hover over it, it'll tell you essentially how to read that bar. And that's true across the entire report. For every single metric, if you just hover over it, it will give you the information about how to read that. So same is true in education. Like, education is really tough. The quality of education, educational attainment in that community is tough. Health and well-being, really tough. A little better in terms of economic security and a little better in terms of mobility. But I'd say this is a pretty tough neighborhood, not only just compared to by national standards, but even compared to the region or to the state. And the good thing about this is we don't just give you that kind of information at the top. The rest of the 25-page report drills down in there so you can see not only what's driving those numbers, so what are the metrics that are actually in, those are here, those indices, but also gives you the rest of the report to understand, well, why are the health indicators for this community so low? What are the metrics that are feeding into that? What are the things that are matter in terms of our networks and so this is a community that, so what are the metrics that are feeding into how we assess those things? So you've got detailed information about that particular community. If we just look at things like walk score, so what this tells us is walkability is decent, it's got 60, but it doesn't have a great transit score. Sometimes we have metrics around what's bikeable. It's not very bikeable, right, which is not uncommon for, right, not a lot of bike trails and those kinds of things, but other kinds of metrics. Are there blocks without? So do we have kind of some digital issues where people don't have access to broadband access? Yes, there are quite a few of those. What is this a place where there's low grocery stores or low access to some real sort of formal? Yes, that's the kind of, yep. What kind of jobs are accessible within a really, the average commute? What's in the environment in terms of overall? Is this a place that's pretty healthy in terms of, dust and particle, in terms of cancer risk, in terms of traffic exposure and pollutants? Is this the kind of place where there's some challenges in there? Is it close to a brownfield or not? What's the median year that the homes are built? Are we in a flood zone? So I would say there's a little tip of that bottom of this particular community that's in the flood zone, and maybe a little bit at the top. So there's some of those kinds of issues. Those are important for the cost of insurance for people who live in this particular neighborhood and community. What does the access to education look like? How many of the kids who live in this community, are they graduating from school? How much are we spending on teachers? In terms of what's the teacher kind of pupil ratio? Are banks nearby? How diverse is this particular community? And you'll see here that all this in blue here, these metrics in blue, is what's happening in this particular census tract or community. But you can also see where the data is available. We also compare it to the region, to the nation, and then look at the annual average annual change over time. So if you look at the diversity, is it changing for this community? How does it compare to the nation? How many households, the percent of households that are receiving public assistance? And how is that changing over time? So 2.4%, which is very, higher than a little bit higher than the region, but lower than the nation, right? And that percentage is decreasing. So the number of folks who are actually receiving public assistance. There's a whole range of metrics about buildings, homes, and mortgage markets. So you'll see this gives you kind of how severe the affordable housing crisis is in this particular community. So, right, what's the population, the number of renter households who are extremely low, who have extremely low incomes versus the actual supply of those kinds of units in this community. So you can see there's a disconnect, right? There's 284 families that are ELI families, but only 135 of those units are actually priced in that way. Same thing around up to 50% of AMI, and then same thing in terms of actually, now this is interesting, you see the opposite trend. So we are very low on units that are ELI or VLI, but once you get to about 50, I guess between 50% and 80% of AMI, that trend actually reverses. You got more units in this community that are actually available than actual people who are living in the community that are at that income level. So this is the kind of information that becomes strategic for you to be able to use. Same thing down here with home ownership. You see that in the tract there's about 51% of people right here, right, who own their homes. That's lower than the region. About 60% in the region and the South Florida are homeowners, but compared to the nation, both those numbers are low. And you can see the average annual change here. That's actually increasing, but only slightly on an annual basis. And I want to stop and just say that for this report, anytime you want to know where we got the data, the source information is down below, where we get this information. And if you just click on any of this, so some of the home ownership data, whatever, you click on that, it takes you right to the data source itself. So you can download it, you can look at where it comes from, you can look at what's there. I mean, any of that, anytime you want to understand where that data comes from, and if you want to check our facts or check our data or check where it comes from or even write more around it or about it, you are welcome to have at it. It also gives you here where is the nearby affordable housing in that community. So if you look in here, there's not a whole lot of federally or there's not a whole lot of subsidized affordable housing. It looks like there's one LIHTC kind of property there. And if you click on that, actually I think you have to double click on it, it gives you all the information about that particular unit. So this was something that gives you more information about that development. It was 127 units, mostly one bedroom. If you want to get information about who it was targeted to, was this 30% AMI or was this an elderly property? So this was for a senior development. So in other words, you can get a sense of what is the other affordable housing in this neighborhood or even around it. If you look at even around it, you start to see there's some HUD multifamily there. There's some LIHTC units. I don't see any public housing right in the vicinity, but you can look around and see what's nearby. Same thing with housing stock. Like what does that look like in terms of owners versus renters? For owners, There are a lot of 3-bedrooms. If you're an owner, if you own your own home, that seems to be the majority of what the housing stock looks like in this neighborhood. If you're a renter, that's not as much of the housing stock. Most of the rental stock is really 2-bedroom or 1-bedroom units, and you can get more detail here. How much of the housing stock is small multifamily or medium multifamily, or how much is it folks who are living together, or how much, all that kind of information. Mortgage markets by race, who's got, how many loans are made, prime or subprime mortgage loans, all of that kind of information, which can be strategic. And again, information about what's happening in the tract, how does that compare to the region, how does that then compare to the nation, and what's the change over time. Then there's all the information specifically about people in the neighborhood. How many folks in the region are homeless, sheltered, number who are veterans, housing cost burdened, how much do people spend on housing and transportation combined, owners and renters by race, so what is the racial sort of an ethnic breakdown of some of these kinds of issues, age breakdowns, race and ethnicity, English versus non-English speaking, all these kinds of issues, employment, who has a job, who doesn't, who's unemployed, and I could go on and on, education. The only thing I'll skip past a lot of this, the percentage of school-age kids who are in poverty in that particular neighborhood, how many folks are getting up and going to work every day, what do commuting patterns look like, who has access to health insurance, what's the number of people who don't, and then what's the health status, how many folks in this neighborhood, in this tract, are dealing with diabetes or COPD or asthma, all the kinds of chronic issues that are really tough, especially for low and moderate income families to manage, and for which that health insurance is really important. And you see that, where the data is available, we match not only what's happening in that particular tract, but match that to the county and then to the nation, so you get to see those comparative data. So I'm going to stop there on the measurement report. I realize that was a lot of information, and I'm probably giving you a little bit of overload. But what I encourage you to do when you go to the measure report is you can put in any address, and put in your home address and download the report and look through it, because that'll help you get a sense of like what kind of information you can pull really quickly. I will say there are other data tools here. I won't have a chance to go over the call, but I invite you to look at some of the other data tools that really focus on the neighborhoods across the region and the state, that give you kind of higher level information. But I think what I hope you see in this measure tool, that what we're trying to do is to give as much information as we can around a whole range of indicators that are related to what's happening in that community, and to give you enough granularity that it really is kind of neighborhood level, but it also has that kind of contextual information where you can compare it to the broader region, across the state, like what do you compare it to, so that you know what you're looking at. So I'm going to quickly, because I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions, and I can come back to some of these tools and answer any number of questions you have. I just want to say that there are other tools in the toolkit. There are listen tools, partner tools, and evaluate tools that allow us to listen to residents very carefully and thoughtfully. So things like story mapping. Some of you may have done that. I think of story mapping as a set of tools that really allow you to kind of take back the narrative about what's happening in your community. So there's a whole lot of stuff that's happening. How do we map it? How do we talk spatially about what's happening in our communities, and then engage other folks with an understanding of how we see our communities, not just what's in that measurement report, because sometimes there's a lot of stuff in that measurement report that can be tough, or that people in our communities view very differently. So the measurement report may say, we don't have access to grocery stores, and when you talk to people in the community, they may say, well, that may be true, but what has happened is we have a lot of folks here locally who own their own businesses and are making fresh fruits and other kinds of food available to our community. I don't know if that's the case in this particular community, but a lot of times the community has a chance to weigh in on some of those issues, to say, here are the issues where we see our real challenges, and where we feel like those issues are not the right issues to focus on. So I would encourage you to go through that. I won't go through all the tools that are there, but just know that our intent in terms of providing these resources is really to give you even just case studies of people, how they're engaging their neighbors and communities, how they're getting them involved in community development, how they're helping them to shape the narrative about how their communities are understood by folks who may be outside the community, who may not have as much exposure, and how they are helping to set the priorities for what is important to change and to develop in their communities. In addition to that, there is a partner tool, and this is really through a partnership with an organization called Aunt Bertha, which I know is a funny name, we have created a way to understand all the services that currently exist in a particular community. I'm actually going to go, what's the, let me just see. Let's see, in that measure report. In that partner tool, the zip code we were looking at before was 33128. So if we were to just put that zip code in, what this is, Bertha has the largest national repository of all the low and no cost services in a community. So what this is saying is, when I put in that address 33128, this gives me a listing of 1,500 programs across a number of categories: food insecurity, housing, that are folks who are offering free or no cost services. So if you want to know where all the food pantries are, there are 13 of them in that zip code. You can click right on them, and it will give you who is serving food and who are they serving it to, and when are they serving, and what are the requirements. And so if you look at it, it'll give you the description of when they serve food out of those pantries, of who they serve that to, I mean, all of the hours and locations. So it'll give you all the information. So if you are doing work in that particular community and you want to know, you want to have as a resource even, just to be able to refer folks to food pantries if food is the issue, then that's there. You could do any of them. You could say housing. Who's there working on housing? You know, foreclosure counseling or home buyer education, or who's working in health and working on providing end-of-life care that's free or no cost, or what are the folks who are providing child care or other kinds of care. You know, whatever that is, from our vantage point, we have to do a better job in our communities of partnering across sector. And so this is a tool that allows you to be able to identify who are the folks in that geography that I should be working with. If I'm a houser, who are the folks in food or in transit or in health that I should be working with, because they are also trying to provide some similar resources to the population in this community. And then I would say, so that's the partner tool. And I would invite you to go in there and check it out. Again, it's the largest repository of that across the nation. And then I would say the Evaluate tool. The Evaluate tool is funny. It's not a data tool per se, but it really is examples from enterprise, mostly about how we do impact assessment. So for those of you who want to take all the data in that measurement report and all the data that you have about your programs and services and community development, and you want to think about how you understand the impact or talk about the impact of those programs and services, these are some examples that will help to get you started. Here's how we do it. Here's how we sort of understand this issue of developing, you know, an understanding of how much our programs cost, an understanding of what the outcomes are that they produce, an understanding of what's the monetary value of that. So if you're offering job training programs or you're offering housing assistance, what's the value of that back, not only to the individual beneficiaries, but to society, to other residents, because you are offering that. And how do you calculate that? And what are those considerations? So there's a whole variety of tools in the Evaluate space that help you to do that. So I realized I have been talking for a very long time and kind of giving you a lot of information. I think what I want to do is stop, and hopefully we have plenty of time for some good, solid questions about the tool. I'm happy to go back over any of the tools, or if there's particular questions about how you use it or what's in there. I'm happy to answer any number, any measure of tools.
So thank you so much, Tiffany. I know this is it's a wealth of information. We actually have scheduled an hour, realizing that we could probably do a part 2, part 3, and a part 4 to this conversation. So we have just about unfortunately about 5 minutes left in regards to the hour that we allocated for today, but definitely think that there is room for follow-up. We do have actually the address that you had plugged into the into the tool bar was actually in Opelika. It was actually Opelika CDC's address, and I believe we have a representative, Nikisha Williams, who's the COO, Chief Operating Officer for Opelika CDC, that might be on the line, and just wanted to see if she was available to maybe provide some thoughts as it relates to, you know, the very comprehensive approach to community development that they're taking, if they had some thoughts that, based on what the quick overview that was provided, that they might want to share.
Yeah.
I just want to know.
So this is Nikisha Williams. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, Nikisha.
Hi. So first of all, thank you for this presentation. This tool is absolutely amazing. It was great to see so much data in just one location. And the one thing that I will say, so, all of that data looks about right, which is why we do what we do. Of course, as I look at it, I look at, how low some of our numbers are, but that is the exact reason why we are here and why we are trying to, do so much community development, not only in the housing arena, but also in education and social services and arts and culture. And, we love the fact that we have a walkable community. And so you've got that number there was about 60%. And so I will say, some of the things on there that we saw are some of the things that we're trying to highlight. So we know we've got some strong benefits in our community. How do we then take that and how do we enhance it so that, one, that number goes up, but this becomes a really great walkable community for our residents who live here and potential residents. So overall, I will say, it is a great tool. It obviously allows us to see helpful data as we are applying for new grants and opportunities, just to show the need in the community. So having all of that there really helps us make our case as we are trying to apply for funding, which is how we do what we do. We do it through public funding. So overall, it truly is a great tool, and it's helpful for us as we do what we do.
Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for that. And happy to have yeah.
And so, that's really great. Thank you, Nikisha, for all the work that you're doing and your initial thoughts in regards to the tool. And we know that there's so much more that we could go through, and hopefully Tiffany will make herself available, because I know we have a screen with questions, because we know people will have questions even beyond this hour conversation. And so with that, I think we had just one additional question in terms of how often is this data updated within 360? Just one quick question before closing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we update the data quarterly, and again, because not all the data actually has updates at a quarterly basis. There's some data that won't change very much, like the population of the community doesn't change that quickly, like the demographic population. But as soon as that data is updated by the feds, we update that as well. And I'll just say quickly, there are 3 sources of data in Opportunity 360. One is all the federal sources that we could get our hands on that are relevant to low and moderate income families. But there's also quite a bit of proprietary data that we have purchased from private providers and made that data public, because we believe that it is important that we have the best and brightest data to do our work as a field. So I'll just say quarterly is how we update that, and we got the best and brightest data we can possibly get around these issues for you.
Okay, and actually I did receive one more question in regards to Bertha, like if an organization is not listed there, they can just go ahead and indicate, is there a way for organizations to have their information added?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, Bertha would love that. So, in fact, they offer quite a few incentives to make sure people get on that platform, which is why they have been able to amass that kind of nationwide directory. So I would say if you're not on there, get on there, and they have a lot of incentives to make sure that you do. So I would reach out to them. And I would just say as a part of closing, not just about that tool, but I realized I ran through a whole lot of stuff because I'm so excited about this, and there's a lot on that platform. But I would welcome the opportunity to come back and really drill down on any number of those tools, and not just about what those tools have, but how we are seeing people use those tools to do better advocacy and impact assessment in their work overall. So thank you for the invitation, and I welcome the opportunity to come back.
I have one last question that someone's asking me to ask you in regards to the homeless data that you provided. Is that regional? I think it said something about 4,000 homeless, and it seemed like it was a very large number. Is that a regional number, or is that for the particular track?
Those are numbers. Those are continuum of care numbers, and in fact, those are just about to be updated because the new data just came out.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you so much for that, and I want to thank once again all of the participants today that took time out of their schedule. And Tiffany, I do want to thank you so much at Enterprise for putting together this tool. And we know here in Miami and South Florida, we'll definitely be digging into it and seeing how we can use it, to do our work down here. And we definitely will have questions. I do want to conclude by saying that we want to thank the sponsors for supporting the work of the coalition and being able to to make these types of webinars possible. For anyone that was on the call, we have a very brief evaluation that we would ask for you to kind of give us your feedback in regards to this webinar and additional information that you may want to hear about. So if you could just help us help you, take 2 minutes out of your time, it would be greatly appreciated. And so once again, thank you, Tiffany, and all the participants today, and that will conclude today's call. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mm-hmm.